Yeah, the film comes out nationally tomorrow. It'll be at about 100 screens.
100 screens across country. Well, I hope you liked the film. It was, I kind of viewed it as kind of a horror film that doesn't have an ending. And the ending is something that we are living with now. Dan, let me begin by saying the way I kind of saw this film is that there are two issues at hand here. One is explicit, which is the rise of Christian nationalism, and the other is kind of implicit, and that's the fact that millions of Americans, secular Americans, people of other faiths and backgrounds, don't really know this is happening, or at least to the degree that this is happening. Is that how you?
Yeah, that's great. And also, first, before we get into that, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. There's a lot of friends in the audience. Thank you for coming. I want to commend all of you, though, on your choices for the post-Valentine's Day entertainment. Very good to get back to work. No, so, yeah, I think... Look, like everybody, I think I was passingly familiar with the 80s era religious right. I think that in a big pluralistic society, we accept the fact that there are extremes, there was some religious extremism going on there. We're all in these media silos right now. It talks about how there's media silos for, a certain Christian audience. And so the truth of the matter is, I think most people, unless you're like, I've really grown to relate to the worries of the experts because I've seen major media piece after major media piece coming out trying to move public opinion to get people to take this more seriously. And the American public is, they see it, but I'm not sure, I haven't seen a concerted effort to oppose it. And so that's, one of the questions people always ask at these is like, so what do we do? Yeah. Honestly, we engage the subject, first of all. And it's really difficult to engage because it's really, really sensitive. And that's one of the reasons we made the film, right? Which is, I know a lot about this stuff. I could not convince my cousin if I were sitting across the table from her at the holiday table. I couldn't engage it, So the film was very much made with it in mind. This is not going to work for people who are fully down the road, but for people who are teetering or people who are on the bubble, people... if you offer something to somebody, you could say, will you watch this for me? And they focus grouped this, they tested this a little bit. Will you watch this for me? Coming from somebody who loves you, who cares about you. I'm not telling you to take a position on it. Watch it, and let's talk on the other side is a way to broach it. Because like I said, if I were going to have that debate with anyone, these are the people who I'd want to have at the table with me. I'd love to have David French sitting next to me. I'd love to have Russell Moore sitting next to me. Anyway, so at least in part, the film is designed to be a tool for that kind of thing. But I do think engagement, we have to, if you want to engage it, we have to normalize speech that criticizes Christian nationalism, even though it's so hard to get over that first word, that we have to, that the appearance, the feeling that there's something inappropriate about criticizing somebody because it seems like a faith.
It's a tough nut, it really is. I mean, one of the things the Nazis gave us is they called themselves Nazism, so we can draw a big black circle around it and go, that's bad, right? Yeah. And they created their own symbols. Yeah. This movement is hijacking well-known symbols that we already have. Tell us a little bit about your experience making the movie. Did you go to some of these?
Yeah, well, I was at a lot of these, some of these events. A lot of them are just, footage that we either couldn't get access to or we didn't want to be at for whatever different reason. They're fascinating. I just want to say, one of the ways that films like this are frequently dismissed is they say like, well, sure, if you want to collect imagery, you can find the worst things, that are said in all the media, and you can collect them all up, but a lot of those people are fringe, and this is not, that's why we tried to, in every time we were identifying someone, we tried to say a little bit about their reach, because I think in another era, those were fringe people. But if you have 2 million Facebook followers, how fringe are you still? You know, I mean, it's a fringe idea that has crossed over to the mainstream in part because the tools make it very easy to do so.
And the vibe of these things, is it kind of a rock concert? Is it, I mean, it's...
Yeah, well, no, look, there's a lot, there's a whole range from definitely being like a rock star and a rock and roll thing to being just like an academic conference. You know, like some of it is really in, and we showed both. Some of it is like, you know, yeah, you're at some kind of, you know, all these exhibit halls, you know, people peddling one or another thing, and some of it is good, you know, missionary work of some kind, and a lot of it is just plain political.
I was curious.
I would add one other thing, you know, and this is not in the film. I try to in the live show. I try to give people more than what's in the film. Yeah, so this is not in the film, but you know, one of the things interesting about going to those events is how warm they can be personally. You know, and I think that's a really important point, that, you know, the grievance is what defines the group. And they are, you know, once you go in the inside, it's assumed that we're all brothers in this. And there's a kind of warmth that it does give you some insight to understanding why it feels good. Now we're amongst our own, we're in a safe community, and we all believe this stuff. And then these people who are super kind to you online for tacos get up on the stage and they say vicious, vitriolic, hateful stuff. It's just, it's a little bit mind-blowing. They were just so kind in person, but then they've got this rage.
There are kind of three demographic circles you can draw here. One is the people who are in the Christian nationalist movement. The other is kind of secular mainstream America. And the third, I think, and you give voice to them in the film, and we should hear more from them, and that is people of faith who do not sign up for this.
Sure.
Now, that must make people heartsick to see these symbols and these words that they hold so dear to them turned around like this to mean exactly the opposite of what they believe. What can good people of faith do here?
Right. Well, a couple of quick things, and then we'll open up for questions and also get some other folks involved. But most people, you know, this is a leadership-driven movement. Okay, the leadership is getting rich and politically powerful, and tremendous numbers of people who are actively a part of it are, in my opinion, I've just been kind of swept up with it. It's the social pressure of their community. Everybody thinks this way. There's, you know, different ideas of not getting into their bubble. But I view them as, you know, not being exploited. Being, you know, they're hearing these messages in church. They're hearing them in all the different media they consume. At a certain point, it's really, really hard to break through, and that's the tragedy of it, because I do think that they're trying to be good Americans and good Christians. I mean, one of the things that you hear a lot of pastors talking about, and I want to throw it out to pastors now, but is the pressure that pastors are feeling to repeat these political messages from the pulpit, or risk getting bounced out of a job or losing their congregation. So we really have a lot of the country where pastors are reporting that in a certain way.
And you know, you guys talked about being secular and not understanding that this movement is out there, and being taken by surprise, like on January 6th. But I can tell you, as a lifelong evangelical, and I don't even know if I can use that word anymore.
Right.
It doesn't even mean what I grew up with it meaning.
Another word they've hijacked, yeah.
Another word they've hijacked. And I, on January 6th, I mean, I felt like I was punched in the stomach. I mean, I was literally violently ill, literally, because I felt like it was hijacked that much. And here, you know, you don't encounter it, of course, quite as much as you would in some of these other parts of the country. I mean, I don't know any pastors here. I'm part of two faith organizations with multiple pastors. One leans more progressive, one more conservative. I don't know a single pastor in either one that identifies with or saw this coming, even. I mean, these guys, Robertson, all of these characters who were leading this, we sort of knew they were there, but they were very fringe. We would have called them fundamentalists, not evangelical. That we didn't read them. When I grew up, evangelical was C.S. Lewis, John Stott. It was these people that were from Oxford and Princeton, not this. And so this has completely been hijacked. I'm not saying that the evangelical world wasn't complicit in allowing this or whatever. Krista Dene has a great book about that, Jesus of John Wayne. But I would say, as long as I've got the microphone, one thing I would encourage everybody to do, somebody shout out, what can we do now? Honestly, I would say that in this culture, a more progressive, a more pluralist culture here in Santa Cruz, I would say it's easy to view these people on the screen today as so alien and so other, and very easy to make the mistake to associate all Christians with this and be alarmed. Oh, somebody says they're a Christian, oh my gosh, I saw them in that movie. I think it's important, and I would just encourage everybody to be like evangelical in the best sense of the word toward people you discover are Christians. At work or in your neighborhood, be warm, be welcoming, invite them over, because I think the well's being poisoned. They're being primed to look from the secular world for, you're not welcome here. And if we in any way give out that vibe, we are complicit in confirming the Christian nationalist narrative and pushing them in that direction. And so I think to be as warm and welcoming as possible is actually an important element in combating this, and it's very easily done. But I was listening to this, and I thought, growing up here in progressive Bay Area and being educated here, I was watching, as you say, the leaders, the political operatives that are guiding this, and I thought, they're not being driven by the Bible. You know what book is their playbook? Rules for Radicals. They're not being discipled by Jesus Christ. They're being discipled by Saul Alinsky. Common symbol, common enemy. And but in any case, thank you again, Dan. Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
And also, Dan, let's give them their due also, that these right-wing people are playing democracy very well. They are using democracy to undermine democracy.
Definitely. I mean, that's the central thing to be aware of, is like, if you can, it doesn't take a majority. That's the point. It doesn't take a majority. It takes a very activated, focused minority, and you can really accomplish tremendous things. And that's what's happening in a lot of the country, and that's what's so difficult about it. I mean, the First Amendment, thankfully, is a anti-majoritarian, bulwark against the tyrannies of majority. So the idea being that, even if you get enough votes, you can't get it. You can't enshrine Christian rule into American law. But in reality and in practice, look what's happening again. The question is, how big is the threat? Well, I don't know. Let's look and see what's going on. We did have, a violent insurrection at the Capitol in an effort to stop an election. It wasn't successful. If you look at what's happening with abortion regulations happening around the country, there's a lot of state legislatures that are captured that are doing this, and a lot of state Supreme Courts.
Stay tuned. It's going to be a scary year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you want to take questions from the audience? Or?
Yeah, well, we got one from another pastor over here.
Yeah, but before I turn the mic over, I just want to say this was so robust. We canceled the next movie.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they'll be held to pay for that, but that's okay. Studios are sort of like them. So we will have to cut off at a certain point, but and I'll try to give you guys a flag. But I do want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions as well.
Absolutely. I just wanted to resonate with absolutely. Sorry, kids, about the movie. I'm a pastor here in Santa Cruz, and I want to resonate with what Renee was saying. But I have a little bit of a different experience because I grew up in Nashville, that's the accent you're hearing. Know people in this movie, and yeah, I knew this was, we lost a family member, QAnon, stuff like that, and I worked as a pastor in churches in the Southeast, wanted to teach the way of Jesus, and didn't even halfway know what we were combating in some of this, and then got thrown out of megachurch world into the beautiful island of misfit toys we call Santa Cruz, where I didn't know. I'm like, I didn't know. Okay, yeah, this is the thing. So it's Santa Cruz Bible, and these are Twin Lakes, and so. But I will say there are a lot of pastors who are trying to do three things. They're trying to refuse this stuff and differentiate the two things and help people understand this is the way of Jesus. This is this other stuff. You pay a heavy price to do it. And we're also trying to rebuild, because a lot of these churches that are trying to stay true to this are financially struggling because people have pulled their money into this. And then third is we're trying to be a refuge for people who have been hurt, who have been, there's also a lot of people, like Renee was saying, who got so caught up in this and feel like a fool.
Yeah.
And they ruined how many Thanksgivings. Yeah. And now they're trying to come back to church and find a way to try to reconcile and try to do these things. So we're trying to provide refuge for those who've been trampled by this, as well as Renee and other pastors in the area. But the struggle is very real. The fight is very real. And it definitely keeps us up at night sometimes, just trying to say, can the way of Jesus that really is so in sync with this community here of helping the poor and helping the hungry, but is there still a way that can win out over these voices? That's kind of the main challenge we have. But thanks for the time.
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask you a question though. You mentioned the heavy price that pastors have to pay, and the fact that people are pouring their money into this kind of movement. Can you provide any insights about why good, decent, Christian, loving people would give their money to this instead of what you do?
Boy, that's a lot of answers. Boy, that's a great question, Wallace, and that's what you do. So thank you, Wallace. I do think they have a heart. There's a lot of argument made that the media, the amount of hours spent in this stuff versus what they hear on a Sunday, it's hard to compete with. But also, I don't know if you heard, but Jesus is woke. You know what I'm saying? Like, you read the teachings of Jesus, and it just, he's loving his enemies and doing these kind of things. Well, that's not who we are, right? So there's this whole challenge to that, and those terms, evangelical, they've all just been corrupted, and who knows what they mean anymore. But I think that's the challenge, is you realize you're speaking into mixed signals a lot of times, and you're speaking into almost deprogramming a lot of this stuff and trying to just point back to the scripture. It's easier than it sounds. I'm saying it's easier said than done, I guess, in a sense, but I think the message has been conflated, and that's hard for people, and it does take time to separate some of this for folks to try to go, I agree with what you say, but I don't know how to reconcile it with what I've been passionate about for so many years.
And one of the things that people here will deliver to the public is theater. They give great theater here, and I don't know if you feel like ethically that you can do that kind of theatrical stuff here. So, you want to take some questions from the audience? Does anyone have any questions for Dan?
Yeah, my name's Scott. I'm a local pastor as well, actually. And so I've been in this community about 10 years, and the last 8 or so been actively in my congregation working against Christian nationalism. And so I want to thank you for putting this out. And as you encouraged us, it's a great tool. I have family members that I'm wanting to recommend this to. But Anthea Butler, who was one of the interviewees, I heard her interviewed a couple years ago about her book, White Evangelical Racism. And as intense as that book was, she said after the fact that it wasn't even intense enough. And so my question, I'm wondering as I'm watching this, is due to the limitations in the medium and things like that, would you say that the threat is actually even greater than what you're able to portray in a film like this?
The threat,
Please say no.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the threat is huge, and nobody knows. I mean, I do, you know, we're walking a line because we point out the ways in which fear is a motivating factor. Fear can, you know, be used to, you know, to raise money and to create political momentum, all that. And we don't want to fall into that ourselves, the fear mongering on the other side, and just raise the divisiveness and raise the tension in general. So, you know, trying to portray it in a way that, you know, I mean, I try to not characterize it. Say, this is what it is. What, you know, what do we all think? You know, what do we think we're really dealing with? I think there's no question that it's still an ascendant movement. I think it's big. It you know, whatever hopes we had that January 6th was going to shine a light on it, that just didn't happen at all. And even though the story of the connection between Christian nationalism and January 6th has been told in the media in bits and pieces, it really has not become the dominant narrative. That's another reason, that's another thing we want to accomplish with the film that has to be made really clear. You know, the January 6th committee, they cut this reel. You know, they showed a lot of footage also. They cut this reel that they showed in prime time and they posted it online, and during a time when we were making the film. And so I was very, very familiar with the raw footage. And what was notable about their reel is there was zero Christian imagery in their reel. There were no Christian chants, there were no Christian signs, there was nothing. And so what that told me was, immediately, was they know it's a Christian nationalist uprising, and they're deciding that that's not their battle. They're not going to do that right now, so we're going to remove it, which is fine. That's what independent media is for. But people have to, you know, we have to get that word out because I think that's a critical part of characterizing, you know, how we might understand what, you know, what the threat is. But the other thing that I think is important to know, that the movie has some of it in, but is about just the statistics. So Andrew Whitehead is interviewed in there. He's kind of one of the preeminent sociologists in the space who has really put all the work into count the demographics, understanding who and how big the movement is. And I think when that work came out, it just raised the alarm to everybody. This classification that they call, you know, Christian nationalism is not an on and off switch. It's a spectrum. And the truth is, most Americans have at least a little bit of it just from living in a Christian culture. You know, we just kind of default to thinking of things as basically Christian, you know. But when you look at what that spectrum is, the sort of top classification that fully believe this is a Christian nation, should have theocratic rule and stuff like that, is what they call ambassadors of Christian nationalism, top category. Well, that's as many as 20% of the country. Not of the electorate, of the country. That's a huge, huge number. And then when you add the next tier down, which are called accommodators of Christian nationalism, that's almost another 30%. So between the two together, what the data suggests is 50% of the country is kind of okay with it. The next tier down they call resistors, and that's also about 30%. And then rejectors is the sort of final tier of people who are holding the line, know this is not a Christian nation, we should not have, you know, we need to maintain separation of church and state. So those are scary numbers, but like with anything, it's a bell curve, and most people are in the middle, and I think the people in the middle are reachable. I think it's the 20% at the top that you can't even show the movie to. You can't say, look, can you watch this for me? But there's still a big chunk that I think are reachable.
Another great insight in the movie was that when you pointed out that it wasn't 1973 Roe versus Wade that was starting this whole thing. You went back 20 years before that, 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. And I mean, it was a compelling argument to me that this is really about race. But I'm wondering how far you can get with that argument with people like this. Are they going to be able to hear that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the full term, and some people use it, is like white Christian nationalism. And you know, right. It's even worse, right? If you're looking for a point of entry to try to reach people, like, you know, I think they're already so much grievance of feeling like, oh my gosh, we're being blamed for racism, being blamed for, so it's problematic, but there's no question it's central to the movement. I don't think it's, just to be fair, I don't think it's, it's not the full-blown old-style overt racism. It's more complicated than that. It's people who don't understand bias that well, people who are insensitive to this or that, but really it is back to that core. Identity turns out to be, that is the kind of thing people go to war for. That's, it's not a policy that you could really debate, it's identity. And, there are religious national movements that are on the rise all over the globe right now. So it's part of this general slide towards authoritarianism, which we would like to feel is not happening in the United States, but if you look at the data on that, it's happening very notably in the United States. So, what we do, one of the things I want to focus on is I think it's great for Christians to reconnect with core values of what Christianity is about. I think that's a really good thing, because I think loving a neighbor, turning the other cheek, doing unto others, putting the last first, I think those are all great, healthy values for society. But almost more importantly, I really want Americans to reconnect with their Americanness. I think that one of the things that's happened, we're in the middle of this great, great reckoning on race, on sexual predation, on trying to have some accountability for all the ways in which the country has fallen short of its aspiration. And I think what that's done, that's had the unfortunate side effect of now, when we really want to call on our core values, people used to stand up and say, well, that's not who we are. And the message, that's not who we are, isn't how people feel right now. They view that as a very corny,
Certainly young people.
Especially young people, right? This generation, our kids, Gen Z, first generation that are not proud to be Americans. And that's so terribly tragic, because despite all of the ways that we have fallen short of the aspiration, America does pluralism really well. We do it better than anywhere. We have a more complicated, robust civil culture, civic society. And so, the idea that we're debating in 2024 whether separation of church and state is even in the Constitution is absurd. And I'd love to have Americans feel a little bit better about proudly taking the piece of, being about liberty and justice and pluralism.
We need to be better about messaging too on this one. We all remember just a couple of years ago how the right wing took this obscure academic idea, critical race theory, and turned it into a bludgeoning weapon, and it's been incredibly effective. And they do that all the time, and there is an asymmetry there, right? We don't see that on the other end. We should use that term, Christian nationalism, to try to show it what it is, but it's going to be so hard to do.
Very hard to do, but language is important. We can use it as well as we can. But again, I think the most important thing, I think people have to engage the topic. We want to get to some other questions.
Yeah, we have some questions out here.
Hi, everybody. First, I just want to thank you, Dan. It's a really remarkable film, and my head is kind of spinning with first the question of, oh no, what do we do? Not like I was unaware, but still. And so in that vein, I wanted to ask two things. One is, can you really imagine, can all of us really imagine what it would mean to have this country move into authoritarianism? What does that look like for America? I mean, we live in Santa Cruz in a bubble, a beautiful bubble that I love. But I'm quite concerned about that. The issue of the Atlantic, the December-January issue is a great issue. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's really compelling, and it spells out that, you know, first time around, Trump really didn't expect to run the White House, didn't know what he was doing. At this point, now he knows what he's doing, and he's got a lot of other people with him who know what they're doing. They have a plan, and they've been very vocal about the plan. There it is.
Yeah.
Dan just told us what the plan is. Okay, so that's number one. Yeah, go.
Well, I mean, look, I do think, you know, to be measured, like, we're not gonna wake up one morning, you know, it's not gonna be the next morning we're all living in Handmaid's Tale. It's gonna be, you know, it's a slide, and I think the slide is started. You know, the slide is started. There's women, you know, rape victims, young rape victims being forced to carry their babies to term, right? That is happening. So what does it look like? It's gonna be a lot of little incremental things. I mean, the chilling effect that fascistic movements have is, I mean, this film is made independently because it has to be made independently, right? I mean, 40% of the country would outright reject it, would boycott a streaming service or a network if they produced it, if they put the money out. So they don't want to put, why do we want to pick that fight? Let's make the puppy movie. I mean, of course. So that's part of the chilling effect. So then there's no money going to it, so we're not having those conversations because people are afraid. People are afraid of being attacked, literally. I mean, increasingly they're afraid of being physically attacked also. So yeah, I mean, eventually you're living in a culture where people feel like, well, let's keep our ideas to ourselves. I don't want to, you know, you know, if you lived in Nashville right now, some of the counties, you know, south of Nashville, you would not be a happy camper having some of these conversations, no question. Like the death threats and stuff like that.
We have another question here.
Full disclosure, I have the pleasure of knowing. Oh, thank you. Full disclosure, I have the pleasure of knowing Dan, and we've talked a little bit about the film, so this question is sort of coming from there. What you shared in one of our conversations was just the way the movie got made. You weren't able to embed, I think that was your word, and sort of take the viewer along the journey. How does someone enter this world, this movement? What do you think the movie would have highlighted, brought out, if you had been able to do that, even partially? So another way to ask the question is, what is missing by not having that? And then maybe the flip side of the question, and you can choose which one most inspires you. I'm struggling how to phrase it, because my experience watching the movie is I'm just going off and on between like crying and, you know, just like I'm sitting there and I'm sort of surrounded by different generations, and so I'm in a way, you know, part of a movie is in the best sort of classical Hollywood, you know, sort of leave you with a little bit of optimism, and I do feel you do that a bit, but I'm still left with the despair. So my question in a way is, were we to have seen the journey that people made, do you think we might have had more tools or had different kind of insights into, to echo or go back to the original pastor, how we can speak to these people, how we can find perhaps a different kind of compassion? Anyway, something about that.
No, I think you're right. I think that is what is in short supply in the movie, and it's probably, I mean, it's for a reason. I think that, you know, like the story I told about it feeling warm at some of these rallies. Yes, we could do with more insight into the humanity of the people who get swept up in it, and to have more insight into that is what would have happened if we could have embedded more, made some more of an immersive project. I don't know if that would have given us better tools, but I mean, there would have been something illuminating about that. I think it is important to remember that. I mean, and I think that both pastors spoke to that, which is, you know, it still is this feeling of persecution that I think a lot of American Christians are feeling. You know, on one level, it's just as simple as, you know, if you were privileged, you know, when you lose privilege, it feels like persecution, right? But on another level, they the secularization that's happening of the society does sometimes manifest itself as hostility to people of faith. I mean, it does. And so I think that's an important thing that secular people could think about and correct, because the one group that's still, it's like politically correct stuff, it's not really okay to like mock a lot of groups in late night television. The one group that you can still mock are people of faith. I mean, you can make jokes about it. That's late night comedy. They, of course, they do that, and I think that's terrible too. And we should probably, and this is, I think, what Renee was saying is all that's doing is making certain portions of the faith community feel, like they don't belong.
So we're gonna have 2 more questions, unfortunately, and then we're gonna have to cut out, so.
Yeah, not so much of a question. I really, it was wondrous, and your film is overwhelmingly giving me revulsion as well as great respect and pride in your work. And as a 20-year attending to the local Quaker Friends, it's not really that Quakerly of me, I think, to say that I really wish that you would title the movie what it is: Christian Fascism. And the comparison and so forth is laid out there. And I do hope that you will have copies of your film to all the educational stations you can have in California and beyond.
Thank you. Yeah, the film will get around. The film is, it's very unusual for a film like this to make a theatrical run. It's making actually a big theatrical run, and then
send it to universities.
Yeah, well, definitely. And people also, there's a lot of outreach to do private screenings, group sales, and things like that for congregations that want to.
And Rob Reiner is talking about it too.
And that doesn't hurt either.
Yeah.
What's Rob Reiner going to do with it?
Rob Reiner is a co-producer of the film.
I know. He's a man with lots of money and his panache and his moxie as a movie
and he's
man.
used it. He's used all.
Remember his daddy.
The film, the publicity, the film has had an avalanche of publicity, and I think a lot of that is due to Rob's attachment.
Right.
The last question here.
I was really appreciative of the references to Nazis and to the Holocaust and the Christian apologist and justifier for genocide. And I was wondering to what extent you saw any sort of historical awareness and historicity among both the kind of the rank and file and then the people who laid the groundwork for this movement.
No. No. There are very sophisticated people who are in leadership roles, but that's not a consideration. I mean, it's not. This is a movement that is really powered on disinformation, and it's deliberate disinformation. They know. You saw Charlie Kirk. You saw people up there repeating this thing that it's not, the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. Now, I'll just say, like every good piece of disinformation, there's some piece of truth in it. They're always tying it to something. So the phrase separation of church and state, the wall of separation that Thomas Jefferson wrote about, the wall of separation, that was in a letter. That was in a correspondence with the Baptist, Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist congregation. He wrote it during his presidency. The concept of separation of church and state is in the Constitution. But so they use tremendously, complicated, they'll send you down these different paths because it's got a little piece of truth. And so you hear that, like, oh, that's true, that's not in the Constitution. Separation of church.
It's crowbar rhetoric where they get a little crack and then they open it up.
And then let's go. And then so now you don't know what to believe. It does say in the Declaration, most famous line, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. There you go, intended to be a Christian nation from the beginning. What it doesn't say is that we actually have the previous draft of the Constitution where it said God And we have the notes where they
Yeah.
said, let's take God out, because that sounds like we're talking about a Christian God.
Yeah.
And let's put a generic creator, everybody can get on board with that. So it's fully sophisticated in that way, and that it propagates disinformation very effectively. And you see, I mean, there can be no question that the devotees are fully on board with it.
Well, let's give one final hand to the director of God and Country, Dan Partland. Thank you, and best of luck to the movie. Thank you, everybody, for coming to see us.